The boss had always been a man of quiet confidence. People in the city knew his name, but very few had ever seen his face outside the walls of his diner. For years he had worked hard, building his small food business into a place where customers felt at home. The diner wasn't fancy. It didn't have shiny lights or big banners. What it did have was heart. People came in for the warm food, the friendly atmosphere, and the sense of community. To him, this place was not just about sandwiches and coffee. It was about family. But as the business grew, something started to bother him. He often wondered if his employees treated every customer with the same respect when he wasn't around. Whenever he stepped into the diner as the boss, the staff stood a little straighter, spoke a little sweeter, and made sure every detail was perfect. He appreciated that, of course, but deep inside he wanted to know the truth. Were they like this all the time? Or was it just for show when they knew he was watching? The thought nagged him for weeks. One night, sitting at his desk at home, he remembered a story he had read years ago about a CEO who went undercover to see how his workers behaved. That story stuck in his mind, and suddenly, the idea became clear. He would do the same. The next morning, he stood in front of his mirror, carefully choosing clothes that would make him blend in. Gone was the clean-cut suit he usually wore to meetings. Instead, he picked an old hoodie, a pair of faded jeans, and sneakers that had seen better days. He even left his watch behind, the one that people always noticed. Looking at his reflection, he saw a different man. Not the confident business owner, but just an ordinary customer. Someone who could walk into the diner unnoticed. His plan was simple. He would walk in, order a sandwich like any other person, and watch closely. He wanted to see how his workers treated him when they believed he was just another face in the crowd. Did they greet customers with respect? Did they serve food with care? Or did they cut corners, show impatience, or talk in ways that might hurt the diner's reputation? Walking down the street, he felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. It was almost like he was stepping into a secret mission. The cool morning air brushed against his face as he pulled his hoodie tighter and kept his head low. As he neared the diner, he slowed his steps, his heart beating faster than usual. This place was his pride, his life's work, and yet today, he was walking in as a stranger. From the outside, the diner looked as welcoming as always. The windows gleamed with the morning sun, and the smell of fresh bread and sizzling bacon drifted out as soon as someone opened the door. For a moment he paused, taking in the sight of the place he had built from scratch. Memories rushed back. Nights of struggle, mornings of hard work, days when money was short but hope was strong. He smiled softly, then took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The little bell above the door jingled, the same sound he had heard 1,000 times before. Normally, staff would rush to greet him with wide smiles and polite words. But today was different. Nobody recognized him. He was just another man in a hoodie, walking in for a bite to eat. He felt strangely invisible, and in that invisibility he found freedom. He looked around the room. Families were gathered at tables, chatting over breakfast. A few students sat with their laptops open, sipping coffee. The place was alive just as he wanted it to be, but his attention quickly shifted to the counter. That was where the real test would begin. The cashiers were busy, laughing and talking to each other as they tapped the register and handed out change. He could hear bits of their conversation floating through the air, but for now he stayed quiet. He wanted to see how they treated him, an ordinary man who had come for nothing more than a sandwich. As he joined the line, he could feel his heart racing again. It was such a strange feeling, standing in his own diner and pretending not to belong. He thought about all the people who had walked into this place before him. People who never knew who owned it but kept coming back because they loved the food and the atmosphere. Today, he was one of them. The longer he stood there, the more curious he became. What would they say? How would they act? He wasn't there to catch them making mistakes, but to discover the truth. Because the truth, no matter how harsh, was better than a polished lie. And so, the boss waited quietly in line, a man hiding in plain sight, ready to uncover what really went on behind the counter of his own diner. The boss had always been a man who believed in details. He knew that the smallest things, like the way a customer was greeted, the tone in a cashier's voice, or even how the sandwich was wrapped, mattered just as much as the food itself. That's why his diner had grown from a small corner eatery into a place that people loved. But now, as he stood outside in his hoodie and jeans, he was about to test those very details in a way no one expected. His plan was not grand or complicated. In fact, it was almost too simple. All he wanted to do was walk into his own diner like any other customer, buy a sandwich, and quietly observe everything. No speeches, no board meetings, no fancy surveys, just a man and his sandwich. It was the kind of plan that could either confirm his faith in his employees or break his heart. Before stepping inside, he reminded himself why he was doing this. Employees often showed their best selves when the boss was around. They smiled wider, spoke softer, and moved quicker as if trying to impress him. But when he wasn't there, when they thought no one important was watching, did they keep that same energy? Or did they relax too much, maybe even let bad habits slip through? These questions had been on his mind for weeks, keeping him awake at night. He had built this diner with sweat and sacrifice. He wanted to know if it was still in good hands. He adjusted the hood over his head, making sure it shadowed part of his face. It wasn't that his workers would instantly recognize him. Many of the newer hires had only seen him during brief visits, always dressed sharply with an air of authority. In his current outfit, faded jeans, worn sneakers, and a plain hoodie, he looked like a man who had just finished a long shift somewhere and wanted a cheap, warm meal. And that was exactly the impression he wanted to give. The bell jingled as he stepped inside, and a wave of familiarity hit him. The smell of frying bacon, the rich aroma of coffee, and the chatter of customers filled the air. But today he looked at everything differently, like a stranger seeing the place for the first time. He noticed how quickly or slowly the tables were cleaned, how the cashiers were handling the line, how the cooks moved in the kitchen. This wasn't just a casual meal for him. This was his secret inspection. He joined the line at the counter, his hands tucked into his hoodie pocket. The line moved at its own rhythm, customers ordering and cashiers taking bills with practiced motions. As he stood there, he listened carefully, his ears sharper than ever. He didn't want to miss a single word. Every laugh, every whisper, every complaint mattered to him now. His plan had 2 stages. Stage 1 was to observe quietly, to let the workers behave naturally without any hint of who he was. Stage 2 would come later. He would reveal his true identity, but only if something serious happened. Something that required him to step in not as a customer, but as the boss. Until then, he would remain silent, playing the role of just another man who wanted a sandwich. When it was almost his turn at the counter, he rehearsed what he would say in his mind. He didn't want to sound too formal or too casual. He wanted to sound like an average customer, someone who came in off the street. "I'll just take a sandwich," he thought to himself, practicing the words silently. He smiled at how strange it felt, pretending in his own diner. As he reached the front, he finally had a clear look at the cashiers. They were young, chatting with each other between orders. Their laughter was casual, maybe too casual for people standing behind a counter. He noticed how one cashier barely looked at the customer in front of him, sliding change across the counter without a smile. That small action stung him more than he expected. Is this how they treat all customers when I'm not here? He wondered. The simplicity of his plan made it powerful. He wasn't giving a speech about customer service or handing out a memo. He was testing the reality of his diner in the rawest way possible, by living it as a customer. No special treatment, no recognition, just the truth. When he finally placed his order, he did it in the calmest voice he could manage. The cashier nodded without looking up, typing it into the register. There was no good morning, no how are you today. Just a quick robotic response. The boss felt a flicker of disappointment, but he kept his face neutral. This was why he was here, after all, to uncover the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it was. As he stepped aside to wait for his food, he thought about how easy it would have been to ignore his instincts and trust that everything was fine, but deep down, he knew leaders couldn't afford to live in comfort. They had to face the truth even when it was bitter. That was the real heart of his plan, to face the truth head-on, disguised as a man no one cared to notice. What he didn't expect, though, was that his plan was about to go much further than he imagined. Because as he stood there waiting for his sandwich, the voices of the 2 cashiers carried across the counter. Their words, careless and sharp, floated into his ears, and with each sentence, the plan that had begun as a simple sandwich order turned into something much bigger, something that would change the way he looked at his diner and his employees forever. The boss stood quietly at the side of the counter, waiting for his sandwich. His hoodie was still pulled forward, his hands tucked in his pockets, and his eyes carefully watching every detail around him. He wasn't there for comfort or pride today. He was there for the truth. At first, he wanted to believe everything was normal. The diner looked busy and alive. Families were enjoying their breakfast, children giggling as they shared pancakes. A couple of regulars were at their usual corner table, sipping coffee and reading the newspaper. The kitchen was full of energy, spatulas clattering against the grill, the hiss of bacon and eggs filling the air. From the outside, it looked like his diner was running perfectly. For a moment, pride flickered in his chest. Maybe his worries had been for nothing. But as he stood there longer, he noticed things he had never truly seen before. Customers came through the door, the little bell ringing each time, yet the cashiers barely lifted their heads. No warm greetings, no welcome in. Just silence, or sometimes a rushed next. As if the people walking in were not guests but numbers in a line. The boss knew what a welcome could mean. He had built this diner on the belief that kindness was as important as the food. He used to tell his staff, a smile is free, but it's worth more than the meal. And yet, standing there in disguise, he realized his words weren't alive in the room anymore. He watched one particular scene that struck him. An elderly man, probably in his 70s, walked up slowly with a cane. He stood patiently in line, his hands shaking slightly as he reached for his wallet. The cashier barely looked at him, her eyes glued to the screen as she punched in his order. She didn't help him with the coins he dropped, didn't even notice the way he struggled to pick them up from the counter. Another customer bent down to help while the cashier moved on as if nothing had happened. The boss felt his chest tighten. That wasn't how he had trained his employees. That wasn't the spirit of his diner. In that small moment, he saw more truth than he wanted. It wasn't cruelty, perhaps, but it was indifference, and indifference in his eyes was just as dangerous. As he continued to observe, the pattern became clear. Some customers were treated with polite efficiency, but never warmth. Others, especially those who looked tired or dressed plainly, were brushed aside with little effort. The employees did their jobs, yes, but there was no spark, no friendliness, no sign that they cared about the people in front of them. When his sandwich was finally placed on the counter, the cashier called out his order without even glancing up. No smile, no thank you. He stepped forward, collected the plate, and quietly thanked her himself. The words fell flat. She didn't respond. To her, he was invisible. The boss carried the sandwich to a small corner table, one he often reserved for himself when he visited as the owner. Today it felt different. Today he was sitting there as a stranger. He unwrapped the sandwich slowly, not because he wasn't hungry, but because he was thinking too hard. He remembered the early days when he used to serve every customer himself. He remembered shaking hands, asking names, and making sure people left with not just a full stomach, but a full heart. Where had that gone? Biting into the sandwich, he tasted the same familiar flavors: warm bread, seasoned meat, fresh vegetables. The food was good, just as it had always been. But food alone wasn't enough. A diner was more than recipes. It was built on the feeling people carried out the door, the feeling that made them want to come back again and again, and right now that feeling seemed to be missing. As he chewed quietly, he continued to watch. A young mother entered with 2 kids tugging at her arms. She looked tired but hopeful, maybe expecting a little kindness after a long morning. The cashiers barely glanced at her, taking her order in a flat tone. The children bounced on their heels, trying to talk to the cashier, but she didn't engage. The mother left the counter looking smaller than when she had arrived. The boss sighed softly, his heart heavier than before. This was supposed to be a warm welcome. His diner was supposed to feel like home. Instead, it felt like a machine. Efficient, yes, but cold and mechanical. He leaned back in his chair, pulling the hood further over his head as he thought. Was this a one-time slip? Maybe the employees were just tired today, or had things slowly drifted away from his original vision, while he was busy with the business side of things. Meetings, suppliers, expansion plans. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that this test was not only about his workers, but also about himself. Had he been too distant? Had he left his diner to run on autopilot for too long? Leadership wasn't just about building something. It was about staying close enough to guide it. Still, he wasn't ready to reveal himself yet. The plan was still in motion and the day wasn't over. He knew that the warm welcome he had hoped for was missing, but there was more to uncover. Something inside him told him to stay quiet a little longer, to keep watching. And then, just as he was finishing his sandwich, The moment happened. The sound of laughter, louder than before, drifted from behind the counter. The two cashiers were talking to each other again, this time not caring who could hear. Their words carried across the room, sharp and careless. The boss froze, his heart pounding. He had come here to test for respect, and now, without knowing it, his employees were about to show him exactly who they really were. The diner was buzzing with its usual rhythm. Plates clattered in the kitchen, customers shuffled in and out, and the aroma of coffee filled the air. Yet in the middle of all this noise, the boss, sitting quietly in the corner, began to hear something that made everything else fade away. At first, it was just laughter. Light, casual laughter coming from the counter where two cashiers stood side by side. They leaned toward each other between orders, whispering and chuckling as though the customers in line were invisible. Normally, laughter in the diner was a good thing. He had always encouraged a friendly environment where staff could feel comfortable. But this laughter had a different tone. It was sharp, dismissive, and filled with an edge that made the boss's stomach tighten. He took another bite of his sandwich, pretending to focus on his food, but his ears strained toward the counter. The voices of the two young women carried farther than they realized, especially to someone who had learned to listen carefully. "Look at that guy," one cashier said, her voice just low enough to think no one was paying attention. "Comes in here every day with his little coins. I swear he probably counts them out just to waste our time." The other cashier snorted. "Yeah, and he always orders the same cheap stuff." "Like, sir, you know this isn't a charity, right? Buy something decent or stay home." The boss froze. He knew exactly who they were talking about, the elderly man with the cane who had struggled at the counter earlier. His heart sank. That man wasn't just a customer. He was a loyal patron who had supported the diner for years. And yet, here were his employees mocking him behind his back, laughing at his struggles as if his loyalty meant nothing. He tried to stay calm, but the words hit him harder than he expected. This diner was supposed to be a place of respect, a place where everyone felt welcome. Now, listening to their careless comments, he realized something had gone terribly wrong. The conversation didn't stop there. The cashiers, growing bolder with each word, continued talking between customers. "Did you see the lady with the kids earlier?" one asked. "Dragging those two brats in here like we're supposed to babysit them. Ugh, I hate when people like that come in." The other cashier rolled her eyes dramatically, not caring that the line of customers was still waiting. "I know, right? And then she acts like she's doing us a favor by ordering food, please. If she can't control her kids, maybe she shouldn't be here at all." The boss felt his jaw clench. His hands curled into fists under the table, but he forced himself to breathe. These weren't just small complaints. This was cruelty dressed as casual talk. They weren't venting about a long shift. They were ridiculing the very people who kept the doors open. He leaned back, pulling his hood a little lower, hoping to hide the storm brewing in his expression. His plan had been to quietly observe, to measure the service and atmosphere. But now, the test had revealed something deeper than he had expected. It wasn't just about lack of smiles or rushed greetings, it was about attitude. About a culture that had shifted into something toxic when no one was watching. For a moment he questioned himself. Had he failed as a leader? Had he been too absent, too trusting, allowing this behavior to take root? He remembered his earliest days in the diner, standing behind the counter himself, serving sandwiches with pride. He remembered learning the names of customers, asking about their families, making them feel like friends instead of strangers. That was the heart of his diner. That was the reason people came back. And now, hearing his staff dismiss and mock those very customers, he felt like that heart was being torn apart. As he sat there lost in thought, another customer approached the counter. A young man in work boots, dirt still clinging to his clothes, ordered a sandwich. The cashiers looked at each other and smirked. One whispered just loud enough for the boss to hear, "Bet he hasn't showered in a week. Hope his sandwich tastes better than he smells." The young man didn't notice, but the boss did. Every word was like a blade, cutting into the values he had spent years building. It was more than unprofessional, it was cruel, and it was dangerous. Because if even one customer overheard, the diner's reputation could be destroyed in minutes. The boss lowered his sandwich and set it down, his appetite gone. His hands shook slightly, not from fear but from a mix of anger and heartbreak. This was supposed to be a simple plan, a quiet visit to check on things. But now it had become something else entirely. He had uncovered a truth he could never ignore. He watched the cashiers closely as they continued their chatter, completely unaware that the man sitting in the corner was their boss. To them, he was just another tired customer in a hoodie, someone unimportant. They had no idea that their careless words were sealing their own fate. Inside, the boss made a silent decision. He would not let this pass. He would not allow this culture of disrespect to spread any further. These employees needed to understand the weight of their words, the damage they could cause, and the values this diner was built upon. But he also knew he couldn't rush. The timing had to be right. So he stayed quiet, finishing his sandwich slowly, his mind sharper than ever. The laughter from the counter continued, each word pushing him closer to a decision he had never planned to make that day. The plan had started as simple observation, but now, it was clear. The moment of truth was coming, and when it arrived, it would change everything, for the cashiers, for the diner, and for the man sitting silently in the corner, carrying a secret they had no idea about. The boss sat frozen in his corner booth, the last bite of his sandwich untouched. The chatter from the two cashiers at the counter had shifted from casual laughter to something darker. Their words, once careless but tolerable, were now sharp knives slicing through the heart of everything he had built. He leaned back, hoodie still casting a shadow over his face, and let his ears catch every syllable. He wished for a moment that he had misheard them, but he hadn't. The hurtful words came clearly like echoes in an empty room. "You know what's funny?" one cashier said, tapping her nails against the counter while a customer walked away. "This place thinks it's so special, like people actually come here for the food. It's just sandwiches. Anyone could make this at home for cheaper." Her coworker laughed, shaking her head. "Exactly. Honestly, I don't even know why half these people waste their money here. If I didn't need the paycheck, I wouldn't step foot in this place. Overrated, that's what it is." The boss's stomach sank. Overrated. The word felt heavy, bitter. This diner wasn't just a place that sold sandwiches. It was his life's work. It was the dream he had sacrificed sleep, comfort, and even friendships to build. He remembered nights when he scrubbed tables himself until dawn, mornings when he opened the doors with trembling hands after barely a wink of rest. Every brick, every chair, every smell of bread in the air was a piece of his soul. And yet here were his own employees dismissing it as nothing more than overrated sandwiches. He tried to calm his rising anger. Maybe they were just venting. Everyone had rough days, but then their laughter turned sharp again. "Did you see that old guy earlier?" the first cashier said with a smirk, dropping his coins all over the place like a little kid. "I thought we were going to be here all day waiting for him." The other cashier rolled her eyes. "I know, right? I was this close to telling him we don't have all day. He should stay home if he can't handle it. Honestly, people like that just slow everything down." The boss gripped his cup tightly, his knuckles whitening. That old man wasn't just a customer. He was family to the diner. He had been coming there since the early days, always kind, always patient. The boss had spoken with him many times, hearing stories about his late wife, his grandchildren, his long life of hard work. That man deserved honor, not ridicule. Hearing his staff mock him was more painful than any insult directed at the boss himself, and it didn't stop there. Their whispers grew bolder, as though mocking customers had become their entertainment. "That lady with the kids earlier?" one cashier said, leaning closer. You'd think she was feeding an army the way she ordered. And the kids, don't even get me started, jumping around like animals. If I had kids like that, I'd just leave them at home." Her coworker snickered. "Bet she doesn't even tip. People like that never do. They just order the cheapest thing and expect us to smile like we're their servants." The word stung more than the boss thought possible. He thought of that young mother, her tired smile, the way she had held her kids close while trying to order. She hadn't come for luxury. She had come for comfort. And instead of kindness, she had been mocked the moment her back was turned. The boss stared at the table in front of him, his reflection dimly visible in the polished surface. His chest tightened, his jaw locked. This was more than disappointment. This was betrayal. These employees weren't just breaking the rules of customer service, they were breaking the soul of the diner. For years, he had told every worker the same thing during training. Respect is free, but it's priceless. Treat every person who walks through that door like they matter, because they do. He believed those words with all his heart. But now, listening to these cashiers, he realized they hadn't just forgotten the lesson. They had thrown it away. The hurtful words kept coming, a steady drip of poison into the room. Other customers probably didn't notice, but to the boss every syllable was deafening. They mocked the food, the people, even the job itself. Honestly, one of them muttered as the line slowed, "This place would fall apart without us. The owner should be glad we even show up. Can you imagine him trying to run this place alone? He'd be lost." The boss inhaled sharply, the words hitting him like a slap across the face. They thought he was nothing without them. They thought he was weak, dependent, incapable. They had no idea the man they were mocking, the man they thought powerless, was sitting just a few feet away, hearing every single word. He sat there for a long moment, his sandwich growing cold, his heart heavier with every passing second. He had come undercover to see the truth, and now he had it. But the truth was uglier than he could have ever imagined. It wasn't just about lazy service or missed smiles. It was about disrespect, arrogance, and cruelty toward the very people who gave the diner life. And yet, beneath the anger, something else stirred in him. Resolve. This wasn't the end of the diner. This wasn't the end of the dream. If anything, this moment had reminded him why he started in the first place. The diner wasn't about employees who didn't care, it was about the customers who did. It was about the old man with the cane, the mother with her children, the young man in work boots who just wanted a meal after a long day. They mattered. They would always matter. And as long as he was the boss, this diner would return to the place it was meant to be, a place of respect, kindness, and dignity. He looked toward the counter one last time. The cashiers were still laughing, still unaware. But soon, very soon, the laughter would end. The reveal was coming. And when it did, those hurtful words would not be forgotten. The sandwich sat half-eaten on the plate, but the boss couldn't taste a thing anymore. His mind was too full, his chest too heavy. Every laugh, every insult, every careless word from the cashiers played again and again in his head like a cruel echo. He had built this diner with love, but in this moment it felt like that love had been tossed into the trash. He sat there in silence, hood pulled low, his fingers pressed tightly around the paper cup of coffee. From the outside, he looked like any other customer taking his time with a meal. Inside, however, he was wrestling with a storm. Do I say something now? Do I stand up, tear the hood off, and tell them who I really am? The urge to do it was strong, almost overwhelming, but another thought held him back. He didn't want to explode in anger. He wanted to act with clarity. Leaders didn't just react. Leaders chose their moment carefully. Still, the anger in his chest was undeniable. He felt it rising like fire, pushing against his ribs. They had mocked the old man who had been loyal for years. They had ridiculed the tired mother with her children. They had laughed at the hard-working man in boots. And worst of all, they had spat on the very diner that gave them their paychecks. How could they? He thought bitterly. How could they forget everything this place stands for? He took a deep breath and let his eyes wander across the diner. The customers were going about their meals, unaware of the drama unfolding silently. They smiled at each other, shared food, sipped coffee. They didn't know that the man sitting in the corner was their silent protector, about to decide the fate of the very people serving them. Then he turned his gaze back to the cashiers. They were still laughing between orders, still whispering their cruel little jokes, still blind to the storm brewing only a few feet away. The boss's jaw tightened. No more, he thought. Enough is enough. Slowly, he slid out of the booth, adjusting his hoodie. The paper cup crinkled in his grip as he carried it toward the trash can. Each step felt heavier, each step filled with purpose. He moved closer to the counter, closer to the very people who had failed him. For a moment, he hesitated. He thought of all the hours he had spent building this place from nothing. He thought of the pride he felt when he saw families eating here, when customers told him this diner was their favorite spot. This was his life's work, and it deserved better. The cashier noticed him stepping forward. She didn't smile. She didn't even look him in the eye. Instead, she asked flatly, "Do you need something else?" Her tone was careless, her eyes sliding away as if he were unimportant. That was the final straw. The boss felt a cold calm wash over him. He had heard enough. He had seen enough. It was time. He straightened his back, reached up slowly, and pulled the hood away from his face. The transformation was immediate. The ordinary man in the hoodie vanished, and in his place stood the owner of the diner, the man they had mocked without knowing. His eyes locked onto theirs, sharp and unblinking. For a split second, the cashiers didn't recognize him. They blinked, confused, their laughter dying on their lips. But then realization dawned. Their eyes widened, their faces drained of color. The room seemed to shrink around them. "You don't recognize me?" he asked, his voice low but steady. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze piercing. "Look closer. I'm not just another customer." Silence fell over the counter. The two women stood frozen, their hands hovering awkwardly over the register, their mouths opening but no words coming out. "I'm the man who built this diner," he continued, his voice stronger now. "I'm the one who made sure you had jobs, paychecks, a place to work. And I just sat here listening to every word you said." Gasps rippled through the line of customers who had begun to notice the scene. Heads turned, whispers spread, and suddenly the entire diner seemed to hold its breath. The cashier stammered, "We didn't mean—" But he cut them off. "No," he said firmly, raising a hand. "You did mean it. You laughed at customers who trusted you. You mocked an old man who's been more loyal to this place than you ever have. You ridiculed a mother doing her best, and a worker who came in hungry after a long day. And worst of all, you insulted this diner, the very place that gives you your living." The weight of his words filled the room. The cashiers looked down, shame burning on their faces. Customers watched silently, some nodding, some shaking their heads in disappointment. The boss wasn't shouting. He didn't need to. His voice carried the power of truth, and it struck harder than anger ever could. "I started this diner with nothing," he said quietly, his eyes never leaving theirs. "I scrubbed these floors myself, washed these dishes myself, served every meal with pride. I didn't build it for money or fame. I built it for the people. Every person who walks through that door deserves respect. Every single one. And you," his voice hardened, "you forgot that." The cashier's eyes welled with tears. They opened their mouths, searching for excuses, but none came. The truth was too heavy, too obvious. The boss leaned closer, his words now a whisper, but sharp as glass. "A smile cost you nothing. Kindness cost you nothing. But what you showed today, that costs everything. Customers don't come back for food alone. They come back for how you make them feel. And today you made them feel invisible." He stepped back, his chest rising and falling with the weight of what he had said. The diner remained silent, every pair of eyes fixed on him. The cashiers stood motionless, their laughter gone, their arrogance shattered. In that silence, the boss made his decision. The reveal was complete, but the story wasn't over. There would be consequences, yes. But more than that, there would be lessons, because this wasn't just about punishing them. It was about saving the diner's soul, and with that, the boss turned, scanning the room full of customers, his heart heavy but resolute. The time for masks was over. The time for truth had begun. The air inside the diner had changed. A moment ago, it was full of chatter, the hum of conversations, the clinking of forks against plates. Now it was heavy with silence. The customers who had overheard bits and pieces of the confrontation leaned back in their seats, watching closely. The cashiers, pale and trembling, stood rooted to the spot, their earlier laughter dead on their lips. And the man in the hoodie, no longer just another customer, stood before them, his true identity laid bare. The boss's words still hung in the air, echoing in their minds. He had revealed himself not with anger, not with shouting, but with the calm, cold truth of who he was, the owner, the man who had given them jobs, the one they had mocked without mercy, believing he was just a stranger. One of the cashiers finally found her voice, though it shook with fear. "Sir, we didn't know. We didn't mean—" The boss's eyes, steady and unflinching, locked onto hers. "That's the point," he said quietly, but every word cut like a blade. "You didn't know. And that's when the truth comes out, when you think nobody important is watching. But every customer is important. Every single one." The second cashier tried to speak, her face red, her hands gripping the counter. "We were just joking." The boss interrupted, his tone sharp but controlled. "Tell me, was it a joke when you laughed at the old man dropping his coins? Was it a joke when you ridiculed the mother struggling with her kids? Was it a joke when you insulted the young man who came in hungry after a long day? Because I promise you it wasn't a joke to them." The diner stayed silent, but the customers' faces told the truth. Some shook their heads in disapproval. Others looked at the cashiers with pity, almost embarrassed for them. The weight of their actions was no longer hidden. It was laid out for everyone to see. The boss took a step closer to the counter, his presence towering not because of his size, but because of the strength in his voice. This diner wasn't built on food alone. It was built on respect. Respect for the people who walk through those doors. I've said it from the start. A smile is free, but it's worth more than the meal. You forgot that. Worse, you replaced it with cruelty. The younger cashier's eyes filled with tears. Please, we didn't think. That's right, the boss said firmly. You didn't think. You didn't think about how your words would sting. You didn't think about how customers would feel if they heard you, and you didn't think about how quickly a business can lose everything. Not because of bad food, but because of bad attitudes. He let those words sink in before continuing. You thought no one was listening. But I was. I listened to every word, and I promise you I'll never forget them. The cashiers lowered their heads, their shame clear. One covered her face with her hands. The other stood stiff, her lips trembling as she tried not to cry. Their arrogance, their laughter, their careless gossip, it had all crumbled in seconds under the truth of who stood before them. The boss turned slightly, looking out at the room full of customers. His voice rose so everyone could hear. To all of you sitting here today, I owe you an apology. No customer should ever be treated as less. Not in this diner. Not anywhere. You deserve respect. You deserve kindness, and you deserve to feel welcome. The customers nodded, some offering small smiles of encouragement. A few even clapped softly, as though they understood the weight of what he was doing. Turning back to the counter, the boss's voice softened slightly, though it still carried strength. This moment, it isn't just about punishment. It's about a lesson. A lesson for you, for me, and for everyone who works here. Respect matters. Words matter. And if we forget that, we lose everything. The younger cashier, tears streaking her cheeks, whispered, "We're sorry." The boss paused, studying them. He could see the fear in their eyes, the regret. And though his anger still burned, another part of him remembered why he had come undercover in the first place. Not to destroy, but to discover. Not just to catch mistakes, but to protect the heart of the diner. "Sorry," he said slowly, "is a start. But sorry doesn't erase the words. Sorry doesn't heal the old man's dignity, or the mother's exhaustion, or the worker's pride. You'll need to prove your apology. You'll need to earn back the respect you threw away." The two women nodded quickly, desperate to show they understood. The boss took a deep breath, feeling the weight in his chest ease just slightly. "I'll decide what happens next. But hear me clearly. This diner will not tolerate disrespect. Not from anyone. If you want to work here, you will serve with kindness. If you cannot, you will not stay." With that, he turned, scanning the room once more. The customers were watching, their faces full of quiet approval. The moment had changed the atmosphere. It wasn't just a diner anymore. It was a stage where the truth had been revealed, where masks had been torn away. The boss walked back to his booth, his steps measured, his heart heavy but steady. The reveal was done. The cashiers knew who he was. The customers knew what he stood for. And now the path forward was clear. This wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a new chapter, for the diner, for its workers, and for every customer who would walk through its doors from that day on. The diner was quieter than it had been all morning. Conversations had hushed. Forks rested on plates, and every customer seemed to sit a little taller, aware that something extraordinary had just happened before their eyes. The two cashiers stood, behind the counter, their faces pale and eyes lowered, unable to meet anyone's gaze. The boss, no longer disguised, no longer hidden, sat back in his booth, his hood down, his heart heavy but steady. He hadn't planned for the day to unfold this way. All he'd wanted was the truth. And now he had it. Raw, painful, undeniable. But truth, he reminded himself, wasn't the end of a story. Truth was only the beginning. What mattered most was what came after. The boss stood once more, his chair scraping softly against the floor. Every eye followed him as he walked back toward the counter. His steps were firm but not rushed. His face was calm, but his eyes carried a weight the cashiers could not ignore. When he reached them, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His words came slow, steady, and strong. "You thought this was about a sandwich," he said, his gaze moving between the two young women. "But it was never about the food. It was about respect. And today, you showed me, and everyone here, What happens when respect is forgotten? The cashiers nodded quickly, their lips trembling, but he held up a hand. No, don't just nod. Listen. He turned slightly, including the entire diner in his words. This place was built on more than bread and meat. It was built on values, on kindness, on making people feel welcome. I scrubbed these floors myself when I had no one else to help. I served customers with my own 2 hands, sometimes working until the sun came up, because I believed in something bigger than just a paycheck. I believed in dignity. I believed that no matter who you are, rich, poor, old, young, you deserve to feel respected when you walk through that door. The room was silent except for the sound of his voice. Customers leaned in, their eyes locked on him. Some nodded softly, as if remembering moments when they themselves had felt welcome here. But today, the boss continued, his tone heavier. I heard words that broke my heart. Words that mocked the people who trusted us. Words that mocked this diner itself. And words, my friends, have power. They can build or they can destroy. They can heal or they can wound. And once spoken, they cannot be taken back. One of the cashiers finally whispered, her voice cracking. We're sorry, truly. The boss studied her for a long moment. Then he spoke again. Sorry matters, but it's not enough. Because every insult you spoke wasn't just against one person, it was against all of them. He gestured toward the tables, toward the customers who were still watching. Every person who sat in this diner today deserves better. Every person who ever will deserves better. And that is the lesson you must learn. The second cashier wiped her eyes, her voice small. We can change. The boss's jaw tightened, but his eyes softened just slightly. Change isn't a word. It's an action. You want to change? Then tomorrow, and every day after that, you will greet people with kindness. You will serve them with care. You will remember that they are not just customers. They are the reason this place exists. And if you cannot do that, then you cannot stay here. A murmur of approval spread through the diner. Customers nodded, some smiling faintly, some even clapping softly. The boss hadn't just scolded his workers. He had reminded everyone why this little diner mattered. He turned again to the cashiers, his voice softer now. You have a choice. Right now, in this moment. You can let your shame turn to bitterness, or you can let it fuel your growth. But know this. I will not lower the standard of this diner. Not for anyone. Not ever. The cashiers nodded, this time with genuine sincerity. Their arrogance was gone, replaced by something fragile but real. Humility. The boss looked around the room one last time. His gaze lingered on the elderly man, with the cane, still sitting quietly at his table, his eyes misty with gratitude. It shifted to the mother with her 2 children, who smiled softly as if thanking him without words. It landed on the young man in work boots, who gave a firm nod of respect. These were the people who mattered. These were the souls who had kept this diner alive through the years. He took a deep breath and spoke louder so the whole room could hear. Let this be a reminder, not just to my employees but to all of us. Respect is free, but it is priceless. It costs nothing to be kind, but its value is greater than gold. If you walk away with one lesson today, let it be this. The way we treat others defines who we are more than anything else. The diner erupted into quiet applause. Some customers smiled at each other, some wiped away tears, and some simply sat in awe of the moment. It wasn't just a speech. It was a truth they all felt in their hearts. The boss stepped back, his shoulders heavy but lighter than they had been all morning. He had uncovered the truth. He had spoken it. And he had planted a seed of change, of growth, of renewal. The cashiers, still shaken, whispered again, We'll do better, we promise. He gave them a long look, then finally nodded. Then show me. Starting now. With that, he returned to his booth, sat down, and picked up his coffee. The customers slowly resumed their meals, but the energy in the diner had shifted. It wasn't just a place to eat anymore. It was a place where a lesson had been learned, where respect had been restored. The boss sipped his coffee, watching as the cashiers straightened their posture, greeted the next customer with a genuine smile, and handed over change with care. It was small, but it was a start. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Habits were hard to break and culture didn't change overnight. But this moment, the reveal, the confrontation, the lesson, would stay with them. It would stay with everyone who had witnessed it. And as the morning sun streamed through the diner windows, the boss felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not just pride, not just relief, but hope, because the lesson had been learned, and that he knew was worth more than any sandwich ever could be. The